In today's video, we're going to talk about drawing the human skeleton and some of the tips and tricks involved in that process, but also some of the complications that can occur when drawing such a complex form. A lot of those complications come from the memory that we have of looking at others and ourselves, and how that can influence a drawing in perhaps a negative way. So when you draw somebody, you're not drawing somebody fresh and new. In a way, you're combining that person that you see with the memory of the idea of being human. So how does an eye look? How does a mouth look? And all those memories are sort of stored back, and that can turn the drawing into a caricature at times. So it's not really what we see, it's what we remember as well. Going to this drawing, I'm going to be using gesture to build the skeleton. And gesture is a great tool to find the size and the shape of the forms, how they combine together. I'm avoiding any details along the way. And some of the first few lines that I put down establish the top of the head and where the foot might fall, and then the gravity line that happens between the two. So I'm looking at this axis of sorts that can fall down through the entire torso. Once this axis line is established and I know where the top of the head and the foot are going to fall, I start moving my pencil very light to very loose in between those two marks. And what I'm really trying to do at this stage in the drawing is I don't want to draw specific bones. What I am doing is I'm drawing placeholders, or the idea of where those bones will eventually start to materialize. I'm holding the pencil very light, very loose. I'm holding it more from the back. And I'm trying to almost swim back and forth those two marks to capture how my eyes look at something. So I'm not drawing specific things, I'm really drawing the movement of my own eyes and trying to keep up with that process. One thing I think about with the gesture is how I can perform abbreviations. I'm not drawing actual bones, but I'm drawing shapes on top of those bones. Those shapes or those abbreviations being ovals, parentheses, L shapes. Really looking for a combination of straight lines and curved lines and how they buckle together. So with the gesture, I'm looking for two main components. I'm looking for balance. Is the body upright, or does it start to fall over? And the other thing is proportion. And I'm using gesture a lot to find proportion, using what I would define as a guess and check method. But as I continue on with the gesture, I start to look for more concrete evidence of the placement of those forms. So if I can see that something falls around the halfway point, I might make a mark. Or if it's 1/3 up or down, I might make a similar mark on the page. Overall, I would describe the process as one where I'm moving between organic drawing, or drawing that is more intuitive, and then the type of drawing that's more analytical, where I'm using measurements and proportions. I'm not trying to slow down too much to perform that though. I'm not bringing out a ruler or a dowel rod. I'm really just glancing back and forth and thinking, am I looking for really strong fluid lines? Or do I want to take a break from that and look for something that has a more architectural approach? As you can see here, I'm beginning to make a few tick marks to relate verticals or horizontals to each other. The best way that I can describe what I'm thinking about while I'm drawing is I consider these to be drawing sprints. I'm spending about a minute looking for organic lines, fluid lines, parenthesis shapes, ovals, things like that. And then I spend about a minute looking for straight lines, verticals, horizontals, measurements. And every time I pass through a minute or 2 minutes of drawing, I try something new. So on top of this foundation that I begin to draw, I'm not doing the same thing over and over again. If I do that, I start to form some habits that become predictable. But by looking for something new every minute or every 2 minutes, I'm actively looking for new information that can help correct the drawing. I'd like to talk about connections between like and unlike parts in the drawing. So, for example, as I'm drawing measuring lines, I'm pulling lines from the left knee to the right knee and trying to find the angle in which those two areas exist. And I'll do that for a while, and then I'll take a break, and then I'll look for things that are unlike parts. So, for example, I might look at a gestural or measuring line between the right shoulder and the left knee. And as I'm doing this, I'm starting to bridge some of the connections that happen across the body. That I'm not moving up and down the bones, but I'm moving through the bones to find some of their placement as they relate to each other. This is really helpful because as you start to draw something like an elbow, if it's difficult to find that placement, maybe shoot across and look at the measurement line between the hand and the shoulder, and then place the elbow afterwards. Something else I'm doing is I'm looking at a pairing of positive space and negative space. So in this way, I'm looking at the subject. I'm drawing the body or drawing the bones, and then I'll take a break from doing that and I'll look at the spaces in between those subjects, in between the arms, in between the legs, some of the placeholders that are basically the breathing room that happens around the body. This is really helpful because sometimes we only look at the subject, and it's a good way to double check the drawing by looking at those spaces. As I go forward, I'm going to speed up the video, but you'll see that I'm going back and forth between some of these earlier steps that I just talked about. Looking at balance, looking at overall size and shape, looking at proportion. But I'm trying to use one way of looking to double check another way. So it's not that I'm simply doing a step 1, step 2, step 3, and then it's complete. I'm really going back and trying to get some of the fluidity that I might have had earlier on in the drawing. And in a few, I'm going to add some finishing lines as I start to feel confident about the size and the placement. Nearing the end of the drawing, I'm going to add some darker lines on top of my gesture. I'm not going to do this where I'm pressing hard immediately. I'm going to use repetition in order to get those earlier marks a little bit darker and then a little bit darker still until they're satisfactory. I don't want to give everything the same amount of attention. So areas that might get a darker, more pronounced, sharper feel might be some of those bones that are focal points. They might be closer to my line of sight. They might be overlapping something that's in the distance. But it can also be something that just feels like it needs more attention. Something that feels like it might be heavier. With the second point of view that I'm starting, I'm pulling over a couple horizontal lines to help me measure the overall proportion, because I know that there's not something drastically different. The overall torso, height, and possibly the width is all going to be the same. So you can see that there's a measuring line pulled over from the top of the head, from the chin, the collar, the bottom of the hips, and the rib cage, along with the feet, and these will help keep that first couple minutes of gesture under control. So I'm using the strength of that first drawing to help me kind of just get into what I'm doing now with that new perspective and new pose. you.